gave my whole life for this.
Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. I recently covered the Disturbing Manga Iceberg here on the channel, and while everyone seemed to enjoy it, I did get a lot of comments about manga that I hadn't included on the iceberg. I scoured through all of your suggestions, and it actually made quite a long list, so why not continue our dive into the world of messed up manga? Thanks everyone for watching, and without further ado, here are your disturbing manga suggestions. Akira. I can't believe Akira wasn't right there on tier 1 in the original iceberg. That was just a dumb oversight on my part since it's one of the most iconic mangas ever made, but I'll cover it here. Akira takes place in Neo-Tokyo, 38 years after World War III when a giant psychic explosion destroyed the original Tokyo. The plot centers around Kaneda and Tetsuo, members of a biker gang. Their lives take a dramatic turn when Tetsuo, after a motorcycle accident, begins to manifest powerful psychic abilities. These abilities are similar to those of Akira, a mysterious child whose psychic powers were responsible for the destruction of Tokyo years earlier. Tetsuo's newfound powers attract the attention of the government, which has been conducting secret experiments on individuals with psychic abilities, leading to a series of events that threaten to unleash chaos and destruction on Neo-Tokyo. As Tetsuo's powers grow increasingly uncontrollable, he becomes obsessed with finding Akira, seeing him as a key to unlocking his own potential. Meanwhile, Kaneda, along with a group of resistance fighters, attempt to stop Tetsuo's rampage. I mean, what can I say about Akira? It was the inspiration for all kinds of media, especially in the cyberpunk genre, and is just an all-around classic. Violence Jack. Violence Jack is another manga by Go Nagai, who you may know as the author of Devilman. The story takes place in the Kanto region after a huge earthquake destroys the area, leaving it in chaos as gangs and nomads take advantage of the tragedy to commit violent acts on the innocent. Violence Jack is a sort of enigmatic figure that appears after the earthquake who fights the violent thugs. While he typically shows up to help the weak or innocent, his name does precede him as he fights with a brutal and violent style, sometimes accidentally injuring or even killing innocent bystanders as a result. Ibitsu. Ibitsu follows a young man named Kazuki who lives alone in his apartment. One night while taking out his garbage, he sees a teen girl dressed in a Lolita outfit covered in filth sitting in the trash with a stuffed doll. She asks him if he has a little sister and he replies yes. Well, this was a big mistake as the girl now declares herself as his sister and begins to stalk him. Kazuki's real sister shows up to stay with him and of course the stalker wants to kill her. It's a little ambiguous as to whether this girl is a ghost or a demon or just a creep, but she definitely looks the part. She has long slashes down her arms that she's stitched back up. It's pretty effective in its suspense as things continue to escalate, and if you just want a good old-fashioned horror manga with a steady stream of thrills and kills, this is a decent one. Ijosha no Ai, which translates to something like the love of an abnormal person. Well, that's an understatement. The story follows Kazumi, who has a crush on his middle school classmate and is making some progress towards the relationship when another classmate, Mito, confesses her love for him. He turns her down and explains he probably would be interested if he wasn't already in love with someone else. Mito seems to accept this and move on until Kazumi finds his crush dead on the ground after Mito went to town on her with a box knife. Well, Mito is taken away and we fast forward 6 years into high school. Obviously, Kazumi is still traumatized by the event and stays rather isolated from other students. Well, his classmate Shino has a big crush on him and insists that he go on at least one date with her. He finally gives in and actually begins to come out of his shell a bit until Shino finds a dead rabbit in her locker. Yep, so Mito is back and soon kidnaps Kazumi's new crush to torture her before forcing herself on Kazumi. It gets even more twisted after this, with Kazumi eventually actually developing a weird relationship with Mito. So yeah, it's really dark and it never really gets any better for Kazumi. It just gets weirder. Goodnight Ponpon. Oyosami Ponpon, or Goodnight Ponpon, is not an outright horror manga, but is disturbing because of its heavy themes. It follows a young boy, Ponpon's life, from elementary school up into his early 20s as he constantly battles depression. The story is told in an interesting way as Ponpon and his family are drawn as simplistic birds while everyone else is drawn realistically. It's also narrated like a storybook at times as we get insight into Ponpon's feelings. So part of why this manga was recommended is that it is truly a sad story. Ponpon's parents are bad people, with his dad beating his mother so badly she ends up in the hospital, and his mother openly admitting she hates kids and doesn't care much for Ponpon. Meanwhile, Ponpon falls in love with a transfer student, Aiko, who straight up says she wants his full devotion or she'll kill him. Their relationship, or lack of one, is at the focal point of the story. I mentioned that Ponpon's parents are terrible, but honestly all the adults in this manga are kind of scary. They're drawn in a creepy style and often do or say really bizarre things that make you feel like you're in a fever dream. Anyway, Ponpon's life just becomes more and more distressing as horrible things happen to him and around him, and as he ages, he becomes pretty messed up. It's honestly considered one of the most bleak mangas of its kind, and I've seen many people suggest not reading it if you deal with depression, because things never really get better, and it can leave you feeling pretty hopeless depending on whether you connect to the character's life or not. The Summer Hikaru Died. The Summer Hikaru Died follows two teenage boys, Hikaru and Yoshiki. One summer while hiking, Hikaru is fatally injured and is about to die when an eldritch monster consumes his body. After having gone missing for a while, Hikaru suddenly shows back up, but Yoshiki notices he's changed, and so Hikaru, or the entity portraying himself as Hikaru, reveals himself, and from this point on, Yoshiki attempts to save Hikaru from this beast while the creature begins eating people in the town. Pygmalion. Pygmalion is a manga about mascots turning into flesh-eating monsters. It follows Keigo, a high school boy, his little brother, and his friend Akko. They plan on enjoying a huge festival celebrating mascots as hundreds of mascot characters gather. Suddenly, a sinister voice comes over the intercom declaring humans as liars, and while everyone is weirded out by the strange voice, the mascots suddenly start killing people, starting with a little girl. So from here, Keigo attempts to protect Akko and his brother, who wandered off. It's kind of a silly premise on its face, but I have to say the transformation of the mascots is pretty cool. They look more human-like as they attack. Like, instead of just being cute-looking mascots that move like robots, they turn monster-like, and their faces look more real. It kind of reminds me of the Chucky movies, how Chucky's body becomes more human the longer he's in it. There's also a pretty interesting underlying story going on involving the whole mystery of who the voice is that started this and how the Pygmalion myth relates to what's happening with the mascots. Dokumushi. Dokumushi, or the Killing District, is about a group of people who awaken locked in an abandoned school with no food. There's a timer on the wall counting down 7 days and cameras mounted in every room. No one knows how they've gotten here, and things get tense pretty quickly as they realize whoever put them there seems to intend on them killing and eating each other, as there's a cleaver and cooking pot available. For the most part, they intend on working together and just waiting out the 7 days. That is until the biggest and most violent of the pack assaults one of the ladies and becomes a target. From there, no one seems trustworthy, and the group becomes more and more paranoid and violent as the timer ticks down and they grow hungrier. Mayonaka no X Giten, which translates to something like the Midnight Cross method, is kind of a strange one. It follows Hiroki, a high school student who looks after his slob of an older sister since their mother died and their father is away on business. Hiroki writes a secret blog online about observing his older sister. He mentions in the blog that he believes it's easier to be a woman than a man, going so far as to say he wishes he was a woman. One of his readers contacts him saying they have a way he could make this a reality, and that's where the cross method comes into play. Essentially, Hiroki joins in on a ritual that requires 8 participants. They all print out a card that they put on their foreheads and then switch bodies at random. Hiroki gets the body of a J-pop star for the night, but when he goes back to his own body the next day, he finds his sister dead in his bed. Knowing that it was one of the other 7 participants using his body, he begins tracking them down to find out who did it, starting with the pop star that he possessed. It's an interesting way to tell a murder story, and it's from the same author of the highly praised Dead Tube. Kurosagi Corpse Delivery Service. This is actually by the same author of NDP Psycho, which I covered in the original Iceberg, and as far as I can tell, takes place in the same universe. It follows the unusual endeavors of 5 Buddhist university graduates in modern-day Japan. Each member of the group possesses a different supernatural skill related to the dead. The main character, Kuro Kuratsu, can communicate with the recently deceased, a talent that becomes the foundation of their business, which is fulfilling the last wishes of corpses in exchange for compensation. The story often leads the group into encounters with criminal activities and supernatural events, as they realize that many of their clients didn't die natural deaths. It's definitely worth checking out, especially if you want a lighter horror series to read, as it falls more into the vein of mystery, and although the subject matter is dark by nature, it's actually pretty funny at times, and the bunch of characters are very likable. Denjin Inn, otherwise known as Electric Man Inn, has a pretty unique premise. It follows a lowly convenience store worker, Tadahiro. His life is miserable as his dad left when he was young and his mother is a severe alcoholic. In order to support the family, he had to drop out of high school and get a job. His only real joy in life comes from watching his favorite teen idol, Masaki, perform live through his VR headset. Masaki actually was a classmate of Tadahiro, and after an act of kindness, he became obsessed. Well, after a particularly bad day at work and a fight with his mom, Tadahiro, in a fit of rage, takes the wiring out of his VR goggles and jams them into his ears, killing him instantly. However, his soul lives on purely through electricity. He can now manipulate and utilize any and all electrical devices. After getting a revenge on his manager in a particularly gruesome manner, he then vows to help make Masaki the #1 teen idol in Japan by using his newfound powers, usually by killing people off who stand in Masaki's way. I like this one because it reminds me of horror films from the early 2000s like Final Destination, when traditional slashers were getting played out and they were trying to find creative ways to kill people in movies, and and this is definitely a good example of creative kills, as Tadahiro uses his ability to cause all manner of deaths, from stopping a van full of pop stars on the train tracks and locking them in, to forcing an elevator to close on a man, ripping him in half. Obviously, as things escalate, Masaki starts realizing this isn't all just coincidence, and meanwhile some detectives start to piece together the murders. It's not bad. Ajin, demi-human. This manga takes place in a world where immortal beings exist called Ajin. Ajin have the ability to rapidly recover from any injuries and can also summon creatures known as black ghosts, powerful invisible entities that only other Ajin can see. While Ajin are known to exist, they are actually very rare, with only 46 having been found across the world, 2 of which were found in Japan. That is until now, when high school student K discovers he's an Ajin after getting hit by a truck and his body regenerating. Unfortunately, Ajin are seen as subhuman and are tracked down and captured by the government, who exploit Ajin for inhumane experiments, using their regenerative abilities for endless research. So now Kei is caught up in this mess, and things get more complicated as he encounters other Ajin, some of which have differing motives. For instance, an Ajin named Sato is forming an Ajin uprising against humans. It actually reminds me of X-Men a little bit, with the conflict between the Ajin and humans, with Kei's group just wanting peace with humans, while Sato sees Ajin as the superior race. Maybe that's an unfair comparison, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. This one's pretty good. It's more action than horror, but because of the fact that the Ajin can regenerate, there is a lot of brutal injuries and disturbing body regeneration. Not to mention the fact that the government is conducting horrific experiments on the Ajin and harvesting their live organs. Lychee Light Club. I'm always unsure if I'm pronouncing that correctly because I've seen people say lychee and lychee, but I'll go with lychee because that seems to be the most common. So this is a really weird and disturbing manga. It's about a group of teenage boys who have formed a club. Their goal is to find the most beautiful women, and they've designed a robot named Lychee to do their bidding by collecting beautiful women for them. The group is led by an intelligent psychopath named Zira, whose methods are pretty brutal. They have many victims that they deal with in a severe fashion, usually by manipulating their bodies in some way. Zira has a strange philosophy regarding beauty and has ridiculously high standards for what he considers a beautiful woman, which is why they build the robot to help them attain it. It's really dark and disturbing, but also has a kind of twisted sense of humor to it. Kamisama no Iotori, which translates to As the Gods Will. I actually thought I did cover this one, but I'm now realizing that I covered the film adaptation in the J-horror film Iceberg way back in the day. Anyway, As the Gods Will follows a group of school students having another boring day in class when suddenly their teacher's head explodes. A Daruma doll shows up and forces the students to play a series of children's games, and if they lose, they die. Starting with Daruma-san Go Koronda, known in the US as Red Light, Green Light. If that sounds kind of familiar, it's because it's a very similar concept to Squid Games. While As the Gods Will did release before Squid Games, the Squid Games creator said he wrote it well before, so you can make it that what you will. But otherwise, it's a very different story-wise. Fire Punch. I can't believe I missed this one the first time around because it's actually pretty cool. Fire Punch takes place in a dystopian future where the Earth has been frozen over by a powerful being known as the Ice Witch. The Ice Witch is among a select few humans who have abilities called blessings. The protagonist, Agni, and his sister Luna are among these few and have the ability to regenerate from any injury. They are surviving in a small village of mostly elderly people. With the lack of food, Agni repeatedly chops his own arms off, which regrow instantly, and then feeds them to the people of the village. Yeah, so it starts off really dark. Well, a military force shows up one day to forcibly take supplies from the village and take the people as slaves. While their ultimate goal is to destroy the Ice Witch, they're certainly not good. The leader of the troops, Doma, is also blessed, having the ability to conjure powerful and undying flames that never go out. When Doma realizes that the village is full of cannibals, without the context of course, Doma blazes the whole village including Agni and Luna. Unfortunately, Luna's regeneration is not as fast as Agni's and she burns up completely. Agni, however, is in a constant state of regeneration and burning since the flames are undying. This process of Agni's body burning up and regenerating goes on for 8 years as he slowly learns how to control his abilities and manages to be able to actually move again. So now Agni is on a quest to kill Doma, and he's actually more deadly now because he can use the flames to his advantage. Pretty badass premise, and this manga gets even more messed up as it goes on with all kinds of crazy curveballs. Brad Hurley's Coach. This is one of the mangas that doesn't have much info about it, so I just had to read it cold and had no idea where it was going. Well, it went in a horrific direction. Basically, there's this rich noble family, the Brad Hurleys, and the patriarch, Nicola Bradhurley, has a famous opera group. Every year he takes a single young woman from various orphanages and adopts them into his troupe, or so that's the public story anyway. So the girls get picked up by the coach that they believe is taking them to a new life of wealth and prosperity, but instead they're taken to prisons where they're thrown into a cell with dozens of criminals who have their way with them in turn. Yeah, it's pretty hard to read. Well, it seems that the Bradhurley family has instituted this secret experimental program to appease the prisoners and avoid revolt. Once a year, they supply the prisoners who are in for life with a young teen girl in what they call the Pascal Festival. Like I said, it's hard to read at times, but it is intriguing as you unravel more about the Bradhurleys and why they've begun this program. There's a few prisoners who actually refuse to participate in the festival, and we see it from their perspective and learn a few more details about what's going on. There's actually a really twisted moment when one of the prisoners who's excited for the new girl to show up realizes that she is actually his daughter. Like I said, pretty twisted stuff here. Brutal: Confessions of a Homicide Investigator. This manga is sort of like a mix between American Psycho and Dexter. It follows Hiroki Dan, a young successful detective. Well, Dan has a little secret. He's a serial killer himself, although he only kills criminals. It's pretty gruesome because you get the criminals doing all kinds of horrific stuff, and then you also get Dan killing and torturing them. The reason I mentioned American Psycho is that he kind of reminds me of Patrick Bateman, the way he jokes around with his victims, and he has this weird obsession with or appreciation for The Exorcist. A Cruel God Reigns. This is another one of those manga that's not really horror in the traditional sense, but it's really sad and disturbing. It follows a 15-year-old boy whose father dies. His mother gets engaged to a rich old guy named Greg, who tries to make a move on Jeremy. Jeremy flips out, of course, and runs. Well, Greg tells his mom that the marriage is off without a reason, and Jeremy's mom doesn't believe him about Greg and tries to off herself, but ends up in the hospital instead. Jeremy, not wanting this to happen again, makes a deal with Greg to do whatever he wants as long as his mom stays happy, and Greg then sexually abuses him continually until Jeremy decides to kill him. Like I said, it's not horror per se, but it is disturbing and just one of those tragedy-based mangas. Die Wergelder. This is a hard one to explain because the story is deliberately confusing, but essentially it follows three women and their ties to a hidden island where you can pay to have any of your desires satisfied no matter how disturbed or violent they are. The island also serves as a human trafficking hotspot. Yeah, I'll go ahead and say it. It sounds like Epstein's Island. Of course, this was published years before that came to light. The name is referring to the Germanic term Wergeld, which is a very specific kind of debt paid to the family of a victim by the murderer, and a lot of the story takes place in Germany, I think. Anyway, it's hyper violent and sexual with a lot of nudity and a lot of blood. In one scene in particular, the younger of the girls, who is obsessed with exercise, is torturing a man with every method somehow involving her exercise routine, like a chest expander that's running through the man's cheeks, an exercise bike that electrocutes him, and a hand grip that chops off his fingers. It can be a tough read at times because of the confusing story and excessive sex and violence, but if you're into that classic manga ultra violence, it's got some great concepts and visuals. Frisia. Frisia is about a new law that's passed called the Vengeance Act. Basically, if you commit a horrible act like murder, the family of the victim can choose to enforce the Vengeance Act and kill the criminal. Because of the lack of law enforcement, there's a high demand for these vengeance killings, and since a lot of people don't have the ability to do it themselves, they hire proxy killers from agencies that are sent to kill the person on behalf of the victim's family. The MC, Kano, is an ex-military assassin who is trained with a secret force that specializes in stealth and guerrilla tactics. He accepts a job working for one of these proxy agencies and ends up being exceptionally good at it. There's a few weird things about Kano. Firstly, he seems to have no real emotions and doesn't seem to care about anything. He lives with his senile mother and his girlfriend, and they openly have sex in front of, and in one cringy scene, on top of his old mom. Yeah, what the hell? Also, his girlfriend actively cheats on him and he doesn't even seem to care. It's really bizarre. So on top of a psychopathic personality, he also seems to exhibit some supernatural abilities to alter people's perceptions. It's actually a cool idea. Kano can be pretty badass with his cool and logical approach to take down the criminals, and the action is pretty good here. I do wish that the bizarre sexual stuff wasn't there, but at the same time, it illustrates the messed up world that Kano lives in. God's Left Hand, Devil's Right Hand. God's Left Hand, Devil's Right Hand immediately starts off insane, with a girl waking up in bed and rusty scissors tearing out of her eyeballs in gruesome and graphic detail. Yeah, man, this is the first of the recommendations I took a look at, and after not really touching the world of horror manga since I did the original Iceberg, this brought me right back into this shit. Well, while that opening sequence will be burned into my retinas for life, the whole manga is chock full of crazy imagery like this. It's kind of an anthology series with each story following a separate horrific event. It follows a young boy, Sue, who finds he has strange and grotesque dreams concerning people's deaths. And as the title suggests, he eventually finds that he has strange abilities. His left hand seems to be possessed by a peaceful entity that has the power of restoration, while his right hand is that of a demonic entity that causes death. The most standout thing in this manga is the fantastic gore. Honestly, it takes a messed up imagination to come up with some of this stuff. I already mentioned the scissors, but in the first story alone, there is some wacky stuff. Sue's sister ends up puking up copious amounts of mud and then a skeleton, and eventually her stomach tears open as large objects pour out and she screams in agony. I should say, many of the horrific things that happen in this are to kids, so it does not hold back at all. It's actually by Kazuo Uematsu, who's known for The Drifting Classroom as well as other horror works, several of which I covered on the Manga Iceberg, so I don't know why this one slipped by. Well, that's all I got for this week. I have another video coming out next week with more suggestions from you guys. I was hoping to do them all in one video, but it ended up being a lot more than I thought. There's just so much horror manga out there, it's kind of insane. Thanks to all my patrons, Naomi Romero, Soma, Krusty the Crab, One Group, Ali Morgan, Laz Wishgender, Malediction, Hunter Piva, Tora, Heather M, Creepypasta Cube, A Slightly Bigger Ant, K.A., Ricky Shadow, Chase Middleton, and Jaka Kafa. You guys are awesome. If you want a shout out like that at the end of every video, as well as bonus videos and a grief sticker, consider supporting me on Patreon. But I think that's all I got for you for now. Stay tuned for more horror manga next week. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.
With the things that I know and the things that I don't. What's the